All right, so we're going to look at the internment of Japanese Americans after the attack on Pearl Harbor. It's a major issue, definitely an unconstitutional one, and so we'll watch a quick 4-minute video about it.
What would you do if government officials knocked on your door and said you had 1 week to pack up your belongings and move to a government-run camp? I'm Jim Lindsay, and this is Lessons Learned. Our topic this week is President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Executive Order 9066 of February 19, 1942, which ordered the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. Americans were shocked when Japanese forces struck Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. They had not been expecting or seeking a war with Japan. But Japanese Americans experienced a second shock. Their loyalty to the United States was suddenly in doubt. Within days of the attack on Pearl Harbor, U.S. officials began to worry that Japanese Americans living on the West Coast might be aiding Tokyo. They had no evidence that Japanese Americans were spying or sabotaging U.S. defenses. Nonetheless, citing military necessity, FDR directed that people of Japanese descent living on the West Coast be relocated to inland camps.
When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, our West Coast became a potential combat zone. Living in that zone were more than 100,000 persons of Japanese ancestry, 2/3 of them American citizens, 1/3 aliens. We knew that some among them were potentially dangerous. Most were loyal. But no one knew what would happen among this concentrated population if Japanese forces should try to invade our shores. Military authorities therefore determined that all of them, citizens and aliens alike, would have to move.
Japanese Americans were given a week to evacuate their homes and report to an assembly center. They were allowed to bring only the baggage they could carry. Many sold valuable personal possessions for pennies on the dollar, or simply left their goods behind because they could not be transported. More than 100,000 people eventually relocated to the camps. About 2/3 were American citizens. Living conditions in the camps were difficult and sometimes harsh. Many residents lived in large barracks. Meals were served in mess halls, and the camps were ringed by barbed wire and guards. The U.S. Supreme Court upheld the legality of the internment camps, and the policy remained in place for nearly 3 years. The last camp did not close.
Okay, so the U.S. courts keep it, they say it's legal, they uphold the legality of it, and that Supreme Court case was Korematsu versus the United States. And so obviously they felt as American citizens that their civil rights were being obstructed, that they were being blocked. And so this dude Korematsu sues the United States, and it turns out that the Supreme Court says that it actually is legal, that in times of war, sometimes these types of things should happen, which is scary, because that means, you know, our liberties can go away in times of war. So that's disturbing. Anyways, moving on.
Until 1946, after the war ended. What is the lesson of the Japanese internment camps? Just this. At times, Americans have regrettably sacrificed the civil liberties of their fellow citizens in a misguided attempt to provide for their own security. The miscarriage of justice done to Japanese Americans during World War II was recognized in 1988 when Congress passed a bill officially apologizing for the camps, providing compensation to the survivors, and blaming race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. Internment camps, quite thankfully, did not return after the surprise attacks on September 11th. Americans had learned from our mistakes, but the country nonetheless continues to struggle with the difficult question of how to strike the proper balance between civil liberties and security. The debates over the expanded surveillance powers contained in the Patriot Act, indefinite detentions at Guantanamo Bay, and whether suspects charged with conducting terrorist acts should be tried in civilian or military courts all raise tough questions and go to the heart of our constitutional promises. Future Americans may look back on the choices we are making today and judge them to be either too little, too much, or just right. I encourage you to continue the discussion of how to strike the proper balance between civil liberties and security on my blog.
Okay, and so that was a video on the Japanese American internment during World War II. Definitely not a bright spot in our history.